Hi, and welcome. My name is Lee Wind. I'm the Director of Marketing and Programming for the Independent Book Publishers Association, and you've arrived at the PubU online webinar, which is given by Mara Purl, our expert, and it's all about branding for authors and for publishers, called May the Core Be With You. Mara, I'm so excited. Welcome, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Lee. I'm very honored and excited to be here. You're one of my favorite people, and IBPA is one of my favorite organizations. So this is just wonderful. I think we'll have some fun today.
Yes.
Okay. So shall I share my screen now?
Please, yes. You have presenter privileges.
Okay. So do we have the right?
Yes, it looks perfect.
Showing?
Yes.
Okay.
We're good.
Great. Okay, I'm going to move along a little quickly because we do want to allow room for Q&A afterwards. And although we're sort of saving questions for the end, Lee and I have agreed Lee will chime in if I haven't made something clear or it seems pertinent. So this is about finding your core message. So it's for integrated authoring, branding, marketing, and of course, success. If you're an author, you can use this process to support your writing. If you're a publisher, you would walk through this process on behalf of your author. And if you're both, then I think this will be helpful to support your whole project. So why should you think about your core beliefs and what do they have to do with your publishing? The overall answer is if your book is not connected to your own core values, then your writing, publishing, marketing will just not be sustainable. Interesting, I was reading the LA Times this morning, and here's something that said brands that took a stand were 4 times more likely to gain consumers' trust than to lose it. So, it's a very challenging, interesting, tumultuous time right now. Am I talking about partisan affiliation? No. However, your own values, which might include compassion, respect, equality, inclusion, if these are part of your core values, then having them show up in your brand will not hinder your progress, it will support your progress. And so what do I mean by sustainable? Well, we know that once we have a book, we talk about it, we blog about it, we discuss it in forums, we explain what it means. So many things that we tell the story of why we wrote the book that we wrote. Well, if we don't feel passionate about it, then why would anyone else? If we have a message that matters, then our project becomes a joy. It makes a difference to you, it makes a difference to others. And that's what I mean by sustainable. So what does core mean? Well, it's central, foundational. It's usually the inedible part of a fruit. It's the central part of a celestial body, like the earth or the sun. And it has different properties from the surrounding parts. My best friend calls me Ms. Metaphor, so pardon me as I get deeply into metaphor land here. Core derives from the word cœur, which means heart. So finding our core beliefs gets us to the heart of our message. So here's a little exercise. If you think small, think basic. What's at the center for you? If you had one thing to offer, like holding your heart in your hand, what would that be? You can think of this, or you can write it down later on your worksheet. And this is an exercise where it's like off the top of your head. You can do that kind of first instinctive answer, and then also a deeper answer later. Now do the opposite, think big. Think transformation. What is the largest goal that you can imagine? If you had one way to transform the universe, what would that be? And just for fun, that's the heart nebula. What will you offer to your readers? Share from your heart, because nothing else is worth your time or anyone else's. So when I was doing some research about this, the core is magnetic, the core of the Earth. The magnetic field and the electric currents in and around the Earth generate these forces that have a lot of effect on our everyday lives. The pulse of the Earth extends from the core out into space. And this is what it looks like when you map these auroras, these magnetic fields. So I thought, well, that's interesting. So if you don't have a core to your writing, then you can't even attract your readers. This is the function of attraction. So if you imagine my presentation as a series of concentric circles, and we start with a wide circle and we progress inward, you might notice that the core also looks like a target. So this is targeted marketing. The wide circle begins out there in the physical world of big events. And so we can work from the physical manifestation and then trace the elements back to their origins. So in the book world, what's the largest outer circle? Well, the largest book event is the national, part of my screen is concealed, is the National Book Festival by the Library of Congress. Second largest is the LA Times Festival of Books. Third, by the way, is the Tucson Festival of Books. So perhaps some of you have been to these events. The first time I went to the LA Times Book Festival, I went to observe and learn. At that point, it was at UCLA. It's now moved to USC. So, I saw booth after booth, and I mean, the whole thing was impressive and amazing. But there was really not much that stood out or made a particular impression. And it was overwhelming. Kind of a good metaphor for the book business itself. How do we stand out in a crowd like this? Well, this was my home city. I was an author. I had to be there. And so I thought, okay, here's my starting point, the empty white booth. And it's not unlike that empty computer screen or a sheet of white paper when you're starting to write something. Well, what am I going to put in that booth? Well, I'm going to have a table. I'm going to have a couple of chairs. What else? Because if you think that's enough, it's not. Well, I had a small publishing company, and we were featuring several authors in our booth. Frankly, it didn't work. We didn't make any particular impression. There were too many colors, too many images, no clear branding. I mean, it was sort of fun to be there, but mostly we just smiled at people. We didn't make much of an impression or collect very many followers. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to have a booth, I better think about my story. And I'm going to just sort of use myself as a guinea pig in quite a bit of this presentation. So I'm not trying to sell you my books, but I'm trying to share with you some of my journey. Okay, so I write about a coastal town. Okay, it's by the ocean. The ocean is blue. Well, so I need blue in my booth. So I bought blue tablecloths. And then I thought, I have a lighthouse in each book. I started buying little lighthouses. Each book features a special shell. I bought shells. What do you take to the beach? A parasol. So you can see I just started building physically, piece by piece, elements of my particular brand. Then I realized I myself wasn't in concert with my brand. I was wearing green. I like green. Well, it wasn't supporting my branding, so I started finding outfits that actually coordinated with my colors. So when people are walking by a booth, they glance in for about 30 seconds. That's about how much time you have to make an impression. And I thought I better make one impression. So blue, ocean. Then
even your necklace there looked like it was like shells or something.
It is. Yeah, I started making jewelry to go along with all this. And then I started helping some other authors. I invited an author named Deborah Gano to share a booth with me. But we divided the booth very clearly so that Deborah got a chance to use her branding colors. She dressed appropriately, and my branding colors. So neither of us sort of impinged on the other. I helped an author named Lori Hansen with her core messaging, which got expressed in several ways, and she's gone on to become a very successful national speaker. So, does your brand conceal your core values, or does it reveal your core values? So, what do you write about? Is it cars, gardens, medicine? Figure out icons that connect with your story. This would apply to nonfiction or fiction, of course. I have a friend named Judith Briles. She calls herself the book shepherd. She hired an artist to create little figurines of sheep, and it works very, very well for her. So I thought we could take a look at a couple of major traditionally published authors. So Dan Brown, he writes about symbols. So here are some symbols. They seem to be illuminated as though they're emerging from the dark. And note his font has these dropouts as though the text has been recovered from an ancient scroll. And these are very, very appropriate to what his stories are about. His website imagery presents, again, it's connected, the same kind of colors. It's a shaft of light penetrating the darkness. It's about secrets. It's about antiquity and history. So it's very, very consistent, all of his branding. And so his book covers carry some of those same ideas, images, and colors. And why does this matter? Because his readers, they know what to expect from him. And they're excited to read his next book. And chances are they'll recognize almost instantly that it's one of his books. Here's another author. His branding couldn't be more different. He writes for a different audience. He generally writes fiction that's called women's fiction, fiction that's aimed at women and tells stories about female protagonists. He writes about relationships. His setting is in North Carolina on the coast. So if we sort of dig into the colors, his books generally have a sense of tragedy and a sense of hope. And to me, these colors sort of say that. The blue can be a little wistful and sad, and then the bright yellow represents the hope that is always in his stories. This is interesting from his website. This is how he lists his books. It's this very, very pale pastel, and those are his colors. It's like he's saying to read these, you have to lean in and focus and get quiet. And again, that goes very, very well with his brand. Now, I want to mention a couple of examples of what I think are poor branding. We've all seen this at the movie theaters when we used to go to movie theaters once upon a time. Well, tell me what the word TriStar has to do with a Pegasus. They're actually not connected. So they could have created a logo that has something to do with 3 stars. They didn't. There was a company, I happened to know this because I had a production deal at the time with this company called Pegasus. Well, they liked the logo of Pegasus and they bought it. And so then they conflated these 2 images. They actually ended up putting the other company out of business. And I still don't get the connection of why this works. Here's another set of messages that I think are confusing. It's called Crow's Nest, but what does that have to do with cowboy boots? They're both cowboy boots are a fantastic icon, but together they don't convey a very clear message. Now, a crow's nest is a really powerful visual, and so they had other options, which they didn't use. So just an example of work that I did with a wonderful author named Mitch Margot. He wrote a thriller about the civil rights movement. He researched his topic for 7 years. It was beautifully written. But the original title of his book was Boxed In. and it had a pretty bad cover that had a house on it. Yes, the story involved a house, but nothing was clear or dynamic about this book. So we retitled it Black Hearts, White Minds. And of course, that title gave us our color scheme, except that we added red, which was dynamic and represented rage, which was part of this story. So this eventually was his book cover. And then this was carried out in all his branding on his website. We also did his audiobook, and we carried forward with a multiracial cast to record the audiobook. So again, the integration of the brand was integrated in every way. Here's another example of one of my clients, this wonderful author named Charles Clark. He is a car guy. He knows everything about restoring old cars and racing them. So he had a beautiful cover, but his name was lost in sort of in the weeds here. And he also had other stories that he wanted to publish. So we stuck with the original cover idea, but we started creating a brand for him with his colors and with his name. And he had long stories like novels, and he also had very short pieces. So we decided that the protagonist of each novel was a car, and the protagonist of each little novella was a car part. And so that actually helped him clarify in some of his writing. Many more examples at my website, and I'm happy to discuss branding. So now let's start to figure out, what is your story about? I happen to like yellow pads. So using me for an example, I had done this radio drama called Milford Haven. It was about a little town. I had hired a local artist who was very popular to do a lovely poster. So I erroneously thought at first that the radio drama poster could just be the book cover. So I asked myself, what are my books about? I mean, you think you know because you've already been living with your book project probably for years. But go ahead and ask yourself this. What is your book about? Well, my first, most superficial answer was, it's about life in a coastal town. Okay. Let's go to the core imagery again. We've been talking about the outer circle. That's the most physically tangible. Let's say it's the crust. The next level is the mantle. The mantle is really interesting. It's both a solid and a liquid. And I thought, that's kind of like our ideas as they're in the process of forming. So we might think of the mantle as our body of experiences. So what would you say are 5 of the most important or significant or memorable experiences you've ever had? I'm not giving you enough time to write these down right now, but these are on your worksheet. So why did these experiences impress you so strongly? And why do they matter to you now? And you can think about these even if at the moment they don't seem to be related to your book. How to access the layers of your self-message? Well, I'm going to keep asking the same question. What's your story about? So again, the next time I asked myself, what are my books about? I thought, well, it isn't just that it's about life in a coastal town. Actually, this is a story about women who are starting over. They're asking themselves in their heart of hearts, what did they always want to do? And are they doing it? And so this, as I thought about this, I started transforming what the covers were going to look like. And at first, I just took that poster and had it colorized. Even so, it's much more vivid for a book cover. So it was progress. So what is always true for you? Like gravity. What would you give a TED Talk about? What one quotation would you leave as your legacy? Or if you had a 1-minute elevator ride with your favorite world leader, what would you say to her or to him? So after thinking about these things, now ask yourself again, what is your story about? This was really interesting as I put myself through this. I thought underneath this story about women starting over, it's about the journey from head to heart, from logic to intuition. My messaging became clearer. My writing became clearer. And in an early edition of my first book, I started winning my first book awards, one of which was a Ben Franklin. Okay, so we moved from out to in. Now we're going to move from in to out toward your target audience. So now you've got your core message, your core icons. What would be your core colors? And I would say, choose two. And for me, what this looked like was, you already know about blue, but now I had identified heart as being a really important part of my storytelling. And I changed my book titles and made heart a part of each title. And the color for heart is red. So then these became my two key branding colors. Once you have your colors, where can you use them? Well, I'll show you on my website. It's here is the red and here's the blue. I carry the same branding into social media. So there's no confusion. Once you land on any one of my platforms, they all are connected. They look the same. Judith, she picked her two colors, purple and green. Everything she does, those colors are apparent. Charles Clark, he's got this flame orange color and then this sort of cool blue. And those are his colors. They show up in every place that he shows up. Here's another client. They work about the early American history, the Revolutionary War period. For them, we've got this kind of vintage blue and deeper red. For Mitch Margot, black and white and red. So of course we use this in our book covers, but where else? What about events? If you were to create an event that's just perfect just for you, would it be a gala? Would it be a corporate breakfast, a picnic, cocktail party, a barbecue? Something that fits you, your personality, your messaging. Okay, for me, I found out, and this was, again, by experimentation, I thought, well, my readers tend to be women, and I wanted something where women who are generally so busy that they're hardly on their own to-do list, what would have them break away from their crazy schedules long enough to come to an event? It would have to be fun. It could include some elegance, some food, some short talks, some inspiration, some fun. Well, so I called my mother, one of the most amazing hostesses in the world, and I said, how about if would you help me do a tea for women? And she said, well, darling, if we're going to move the furniture, let's do 3 in a row. And so that's what we ended up doing. And they were elegant. Oh, my goodness, they were packed. We got full-page articles in the local press. People were inspired. Okay, so what are my books about? Now I would answer they're about women's lives. They're about what we want and how we get there. And you can see my book covers have evolved and transformed, and they've become bestsellers. So after 20 years, I'm an overnight success. So the more attention you pay to your core, the more it will work for you. Your message will be connected to your heart. Your branding elements will be integrated. Your core will draw attention from your audience, your readers, your followers. They'll feel your influence and enjoy and benefit from your message. So that's the presentation part.
Well, cool. Well, you left us a good amount of time for questions, and that was really fascinating. Thank you, Mara.
Thank you.
So definitely, you know, this is a great time. Chime in with your questions in the chat feature. Again, there's a row of buttons to the bottom center of your screen. The one that looks like a talking balloon would be a great one to click on, and then you can share your question. I want to share our poll results from our initial poll. We have 30% author publishers, 30% indie publishers, 10% future publishers. Again, we're not all, the math isn't perfect because we don't have everyone participating. But, and then in terms of who you publish books for, 30% children, 30% teen, half adult, and then fiction and nonfiction, an exact split down the middle. And then about 20% of people are doing gift photography or other kinds of books. So the first question I had was, you talked a lot about colors and about their meanings, and yet there's a lot of different meanings for the same color, right? Like you were talking at one point that blue is sort of sadness, but a different blue is sort of patriotic. And is there some sort of, like, how do people find out about what colors have what meaning?
Research. I mean, research is probably at least 25% of where I spend my time. And from different cultures or different perspectives, colors do have different meanings. In Japan, for example, white is the color of death, whereas in our culture, black is the color of death. I mean, you know, there are multiple meanings for. So what you need to do is connect what works for you. And in the context of Nicholas Sparks, the blue, his books have a sadness and tragedy and wistfulness. So it's he who has infused that blue. But for me, blue is a core part of my messaging, and it has more to do with possibility, the sense of you're standing on the ocean and you're standing on the beach looking at the ocean, and all things are possible. And so there's a sense of renewal and freshness that I associate with the ocean. So, you know, yellow, hope, cheerfulness, sunlight. I think that if it makes sense to you and it really speaks to you, then you have to trust that it will speak to your followers.
And everything around it, I guess, imbues it with meaning as well, right? Like even the fading thing, that was really cool, that one example. So one of the questions is, can you speak to branding a specific book versus branding a series?
Certainly. Yeah, not all books need to be a series. I do think that if you as an author, it may be important for you as an author to create a brand. For some people, it's more the book or the series, and for others, it's more the author himself or herself. And you may be writing in quite a variety of genres. And so, I mean, for example, maybe back to basics is a part of your branding, in which case a courier font and an image of a typewriter might make sense for you for all of your books, because you like to go back to basics. So you can think about whether it's going to make the most sense to brand yourself as an author or to brand the project that you're working on.
There's a similar question that we have from Joanna, who speaks about representing a publishing company and an author. So it's a family business, and they each author within it has their own brand. And wondering, do their brands have to match each other or have an overall match to what the publishing company brand is? Like, how do they organize having a brand for the company and then a brand for each author within the company?
Well, first, I think it is important for a publishing company to have a brand. Haven Books has been around since 1997, and our brand is, it's very different from my personal brand, but it's distinct and recognizable. And when we make a choice about who to publish, we just look for, we've published different kinds of things and or consulted with authors on many different kinds of projects. They don't need to match our physical branding at all. The only criteria is, though, that if we don't believe in what they're doing, then we can't help them or publish them. So if I feel someone has messaging that's, hateful, I'm not saying that they don't have a perfect right to their free speech, but I'm saying I couldn't support or promote or publish or consult for them and help them get out a hateful message. I think that each publishing house might have to decide on things thematically. I have another publishing company called Belkeep, which only publishes women's fiction, and that was part of the foundational documents and the core idea for that book. The authors in that house do not match branding, but all the authors are reaching towards the audience for women's fiction. Does that help?
Sorry, on mute. Yes, that helps. Joseph is wondering about how it would apply to picture books.
How branding would apply?
Yeah.
I have so far personally worked on two children's books, and we really did exactly the same process. Again, we thought about what would be the colors that would best represent the story. One of the books we worked on was about a well-known cowboy who adopted an elephant. And this baby elephant came to live on his ranch. And, it was a picture book, but it was a nonfiction picture book. And the artwork for the story kind of came first. And it included bright Colorado blue skies and all the colors that are present on the ranch, kind of done in a pastel version. So all the branding from that book came out of that artwork.
Yeah, that makes sense in terms of it driving the sort of the color choices. And
so that the messaging, the children and the parents and the grandparents who are going to read the story to children, there was no conflict or confusion. It was clear right away, even from the cover. It's like, oh, we see what this book is about. And we're being invited into this ranch. Well, we haven't been to a ranch that has an elephant. That looks like fun.
I wonder if, in a funny way, an illustrator, I'm not an illustrator, but I wonder if they're doing some of this work when they're making their decisions about how to do their illustrations. They have to choose the color palette for the book. So in a funny way, they're doing some of that heavy lifting.
I think they are. Yeah, I mean, in the case of this book, he could work from photographs, and so he did a lighthearted pastel version of some of these photographs that came from the ranch. most projects you'd be working more from your own imagination. But I agree, Lee, that you would be really kind of doing that same work.
That's really cool. All right, so we have a little bit of time, and Joseph says thanks, very helpful. So, Mar, what I was going to ask is, why don't we go back to one of those exercises and see if we can maybe give people a couple of minutes to do them, and then maybe open it up so one or two people could share and you could comment if everybody's amenable to that.
I think that's a great idea.
To get the most that we can get out of this time. And you bested our estimate of how long it would take to get through the slides. So
okay, good. So let's go back to.
Oh, Joanna likes the idea. Yay! Thank you for the thumbs up, Joanna. Because I want to play with it a little bit. And
yeah, no, that's what to do. Playing with this is just great.
And of course, everyone will get the handouts on Friday with the recording, but let's take advantage of, in the nicest way, take full, the opportunity of having Mara here, and let's take a couple of minutes and let's do one of the exercises and then share and then hear Mara's thoughts about, giving us feedback. So we have 21 minutes, so we're going to get into it.
Good.
And Mara, thank you for being flexible to that, and thanks everyone for hanging for it. I think it's a neat opportunity. And I actually loved, as you're flipping through the slides really quickly, I love that image of the empty booth. I found it super inspiring. The idea of taking it, taking your brand and like, what would you put there?
It was really helpful.
Yeah, and for someone like me, I write for kids, and I have picture books, middle grade and YA. It's very interesting to think about like, well, what are the unifying themes, and how do I create a brand that's encompasses everything in some ways, and yet lets each project still speak. So I think about this a lot, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit. So I'm excited that we get to do this. It's like seeing your whole presentation again.
Yeah.
All right.
So
will you walk us through this?
Ask yourself, what is my story about? Take a minute and write this down.
And for the purposes of this exercise, Mara, we're thinking one project, right? One book.
Correct. You could choose one book, you could choose yourself as an author, or you could choose your publishing house.
Okay.
Whichever one of those three makes the most sense right now.
Whoops, we went back to my slides.
Yes, I am going to look for a handout and see if I can share that.
Oh, super, yeah. You could do the same thing with share, going up to share file.
Right. So here, when you're ready, are two really fun questions to work on. At the very center of your core beliefs, expressed in the smallest number of words, what is most important to you? Then the next would be, what is the largest possible message you can imagine sharing with the largest possible audience? Something along the lines of world peace. The next would be to jot down some icons that could represent your story. And then we already asked ourselves the first level of what is your book about. So then let's move on to what are 5 of the most important experiences you've ever had? And then in what way are these experiences part of your story? This can even be a bit subtle. For example, in my personal life, when I was a child, I moved to Japan. So that was one of the biggest experiences of my life. I don't have any characters so far in my series who moved to Japan. But a core part of my storytelling is people who move to my little fictional town to make a dramatic change in their lives. So in that way, that core experience of mine is showing up in my writing.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that example. So Mara, how about we take 1 or 2 of these questions and open it up for people that want to share?
I'd love to do that.
Okay, so I have this amazing thing with this technology that we're actually able to open a phone line of someone individually. So if you want to raise your hand or use the chat to let me know that you would like to speak, I will open up your phone line and we should be able to hear you. So let's use the chat. I think that's going to be the easiest thing. Just use the chat and say, I'd like to speak. I'd like to share. Oh, and Chris says that they have a severe thunderstorm moving in, so they're going to exit the event, but they look forward to the info and the rest on video.
Oh, thank you for being here.
Cheers. Yes, thank you, Chris. So which questions should we ask folks to? Is there a specific one, Mara, that you think that by sharing answers, it would be helpful for others?
I think, what is your story about?
Okay. Well, I see Joanna is willing to share. So I'm going to pick on you. So let's try. Joanna, you should be unmuted. Let's see if we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Ah, great. Well, I'm taking my collection that I'm working on, I've got a collection of I started writing poetry 20 years ago when I was in my teens, and then I had 20 years of it in pieces while I was also struggling with a lot of different issues. And I finally decided I had to share them because it's one of those things you don't want to talk about because then everyone starts labeling you and everything. But then it was also like, I have to like let this thing live. So when I started out, it was 20 years of snapshots, the arc of using expression to communicate and discover. It wasn't quite healing. I mean, healing seems like too limited of a word, but it was kind of like a sanctuary when there are certain things you're not allowed to speak out loud. So I kind of want to let that live, not just for people who are also experiencing things that I went through, but because in general we have that art that's going out of our schools. And I think if you don't have something that allows you to just exist, it loses something very precious that it must exist, especially during the times when you don't have enough context, I mean, 20 years later, I'm like, actually, it's a good thing that all that stuff went down, but it took a long time to get to that arc. And originally, when I wanted to talk about it, it was like, it felt kind of cliche and almost patronizing to be like, hey, it's okay, even if it takes 20 years, it does get better. It's like, yeah, let's not do that. I mean, so that was that.
So at this point, are you publishing? So, okay, this is going to be then a book of poetry?
It's 3 books.
Okay, a trilogy of poetry. Okay. And so what you're working on then is titling, colors, branding, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's sort of, I have a lot of works that I want to put out. I have children's stories, and then I have young adult novels, but I'm somewhat tentative of having my first thing that I'm sharing be this kind of subject. Like, is it going to end up closing a bunch of doors and be like, oh, you're that person, It's like, no, I can have a lot of other things. But it just occurred to me I should probably be responding about the book that I work for in my company. When you were asking the questions, I first thought was my personal things that I'm authoring.
But that's fine too. I mean, it's all that we learn from it all, right?
Yeah, and the thing is that when you were talking about the core colors, my favorite color was always the rainbow. People said you can't have that be your color because that's several colors. But what I like about the rainbow is that it's the spectrum of all colors in white. So it's the things that you kind of don't see unless there's a storm. So you have to kind of go through the hard parts in order to see it. But then later I thought, okay, that's too complicated. I can try just doing the night and the stars. Because for me, black isn't darkness. It's just, there's no light.
Can I just say that what you just said to me is the perfect metaphor for what you're working on. The rainbow, the fact that it's visible because of a storm. And that can be represented very easily without it appearing to be too complicated. I mean, you can have on a website or on a book cover, you can have a storm cloud and a rainbow. You could even have a prism that becomes, the focal point of that, let's say, sacred space, where you have a safe, protected space in which you're processing whatever needs to be processed. And light passing through a prism is a processing. So that you can look at it both ways, that it either is fracturing the light into all the colors or it's coalescing all the colors, into white. And either way, it's a valid metaphor for the work that you've done over these 20 years to be presented.
Thank you.
Your poetry.
That was really great.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful.
All right, so thank you, Joanna. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I'm going to open the line up for Kathleen next, who is the next person that raised her virtual hand. Kathleen, you should be unmuted.
Hello, Lee and Mara. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And Joanna, that was beautiful.
Yes.
I just Go for it, honey. I loved everything she said. I consider myself primarily an artist, and the books. I have one book that's been published already, and the second one is coming out later this year. So all of my books have a tie-in of art. I had to write some words to go along with those pictures. And the book that's going to come out this year is an illustrated childhood memoir in the form of short stories. Like Mara, I grew up in a town on the seashore in South Florida in a tropical environment. And the only landmark in our town was a big, giant red lighthouse, which is still there. And so the colors of the sea and sky are featured on the cover of the book, which is supposed to, the blue, the green, and the sea colors are supposed to inspire joy. And obviously the lighthouse is a tie-in because that was just our landmark. And I was trying to think of all the questions here that you asked about. Basically, the stories are simple stories of a happy childhood and childhood adventure in a time when, there weren't all kinds of technology available for us, no children's programming on TV, no cell phones, no computers, and the only transportation was your feet or your bike. So the stories deal with just interacting with our world, nature, the neighborhood kids, your family, and it's probably going to evoke feelings of similar experiences, maybe in a different setting, but for people who read it, preparing for Thanksgiving or looking forward to Christmas and Santa Claus, or going to the beach, which for us was every day. But the setting will be different, and maybe that'll be the novelty factor for people. But it's supposed to evoke feelings of nostalgia.
I don't know whether it would work for you to have the lighthouse present in each image or in each story, but it seems like a good.
The lighthouse is on the cover. The lighthouse will be on the cover. The picture, a scene of the at the beach,
okay.
Me and my two sisters on the beach looking up at the lighthouse. Yes.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so since the lighthouse will be a part of this imagery, then I would just say think about everything that the lighthouse represents. It gives it's a physical orientation. It's a navigation point. It means you can't really get lost. If you can see the lighthouse, you can always get home.
Exactly.
There's a sense of
stability.
Stories. There's a sense of the lighthouse stands through a storm. It illuminates a beautiful night. It's spectacular in the daytime. So just to include it as a major part of the branding of this series and of the storytelling, and I would just carry it out not only visually, but make sure that in each story it is mentioned. They go there, they see it. It is somehow present in the words so that it's being reflected visually and textually.
Well, every story is not about the lighthouse, but there are multiple stories where those features of the lighthouse that you mentioned are addressed. And one thing that I thought about doing, I have to talk to the editor about it, is to include a little page indicating that a portion of the proceeds will go to lighthouse preservation, which is a big issue. Because
yes. I do the same.
They're structures that are vulnerable to the elements because they're right there on the ocean. And
so I'm not saying that each story needs to be about the lighthouse, but I would make sure that it is mentioned in each story.
Yes. Okay.
And I'll just interject that
right.
It does seem that the lighthouse could serve as a metaphor as well for why you're going back to these stories from your childhood, that they are your compass in some way, and that they've
Yes.
helped you in some way. So you can lean into that as well.
Yeah,
Really,
it's lighting the path.
Oh, that's a good one.
really cool.
Yes, that's a
Kathleen.
good one.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank
I'm
you.
gonna open it up to our last attendee that raised their hand, Delia. I'm going to unmute you, and hopefully we should be able to hear you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hello.
Okay, all right, great. Well, I have a vampire series that's an adult series, and I've worked really hard on the branding for that. But my next book is a YA, and it's going to be the first in that series. And so I want to make sure that those are very distinct, and yet it still fits with my branding as an author as a whole. So what I did with my vampire series is, because I have a lot of like famous figures from history who show up, like Marie Antoinette is my main character. I didn't want to put a picture on that, so I just made it a really rich red that kind of looks like blood splash, and every cover, the title has something to do with blood in it. So that way it keeps that branding idea going through there. You can recognize, oh yeah, okay, it's in the blood, out for blood, you know, every title.
Okay, good, very good.
So my next series is going to be about a young girl she's had a heart transplant, and she starts having psychic visions that come from the person's heart, that person had been a psychic, and so she's having these things that start happening to her. So it's kind of a paranormal thing that she gains as a result of that.
Can I just ask you, will there be other YA additions to this series?
Oh yes, it's the first in a series.
And so do all of them have a paranormal aspect, or do all of them have a transplant medical aspect?
It's the same girl. It's going to be
the same girl.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first one is called The Broken-Hearted Girl, because that's where she's starting.
Mm-hmm.
And then my thinking was that the next one would be The Open-Hearted Girl, because that is an internal change in her.
I love that. Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if I should do like, because I've still got red on my other one, so I thought maybe I would pick red and have that be in that, because that still goes with the heart idea. But I didn't know whether I should go with it having like that graphically represented, or just the color itself, since that's what I did with my vampire series. I don't know whether I should, you know, show the I don't know, YA books seems to show people on the covers more than adult books do. So I wasn't sure, I'm not sure how to go about that difference.
Well, just to start for a moment, just with the colors, I think red certainly works for both series, but with your vampire series, it would tend to be red and black, let's say.
Yes.
Whereas for the YA series, maybe it's red and white, or red and gold, or, you know, something that's sort of leaning in a different direction and leading the eye and the reader into a different, and so it'll be instantly recognizable that it's distinct. And yet what's so great is you've still got red as a core branding element for you, the author.
Okay.
And as to whether or not you need, I think you could have a lot of fun with having heart images, artistic heart images on the covers for the YA series, kind of like watercolor hearts. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not quite ready, but I'm almost ready to start posting, you know, pre-order links, and so I want to have the cover really. I'm talking to my artist now, and I want to make sure that I have that, you know, so that I can carry it through. It's going to be at least 3 books and maybe more. My vampire series is looking like 9. So, you know, I want to have that. I want to have it be distinct and yet still look nice on the table next to the others.
Yeah. There's certainly a way for that to work. And it sounds, you know, like you've got 2 terrific series. I love the idea for your YA series. Beautiful.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
You know, I would just love to continue to hear from those of you who want to share. I'd love to see your book covers and hear what's going on with your work and follow you on social media. So, send me a link.
And then also, we're just really running down on time. We have just about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
I do want to say thank you to everyone for participating. I did a little random number generating, and the cool thing is that Mara has volunteered to give 3 half-hour consults to 3 winners from today's webinar, so you can get to talk to her more about branding and your own personal stuff. So the winners are Jen Grace and Terry Wright and Paul Yalnezian. Forgive me for not pronouncing your name super well. Yalnezian. Yeah, okay. That's how it's spelled, but I don't know that that's how it's pronounced. I apologize. I'll send emails to all of you introducing you and Mara. But certainly, you also will all get the contact information for Mara as well, which is up on the screen right now, but also you'll get it on Friday with the recording. Mara, any final thoughts to wrap us up?
Just if you're going to contact me for consulting, email me so we can set up a time, and then we'll decide the best way to connect, whether it's phone or Zoom or whatever might work best. And I just want to say, write from the heart and publish from the heart and be integrated with your branding, and you'll reach your readers and really make a difference in the world. I can't tell you how strongly I believe in the power of our writing and publishing. So I encourage you all and respect your path and really wish you the best.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much.